Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of Step by Step. Today we're going to be taking a look at the metagame as it has changed from the previous weekend. We're going to analyze the results of the Madison and Birmingham regionals and take a look at a new tiers 1 through 3 list. So I hope you're excited and we'll go ahead and get started. So first of all, we've got to look here at all the decks that made top 32 in Madison and Birmingham, and we can kind of take a look at what was most popular. I think the biggest and most important thing that I can see is that there were 16 different decks in the top 64 spots. And I think that's really awesome. That's way healthier, and that's the way the game should be right now. When I made my video called Pokemon is Fun Again and listed the top 25 decks in Standard, this is kind of what I was talking about. Like, there's a lot of different things that can be really good depending on how the meta develops. So taking a look at this, obviously we see Garbodor Drampa is still the most popular, but 15 out of 64 spots sure is not overwhelming. I mean, it's maybe 25%-ish, roughly. So I definitely will take that. I still don't think Garbodor Drampa is the best deck in the format. I still think it struggles with a lot of other things listed on this list. It should sort of struggle with the Vikavolt deck. It should struggle with Vespiquen Zoroark a little bit. It should struggle with Laurentiis, Taboo, Bulu. Possibly struggle with Ninetales, just depends on how fast they get a Drampa going versus Ninetales. Definitely struggles with Darkrai. Could possibly struggle with Decidueye. Sometimes it just overwhelms Decidueye, though, the Drampas do. So yeah, there's a lot going on here. I think Garbodor Drampa is just the most popular deck, not the best deck. We'll get into what I think is the best deck in a little bit. And then we see a few decks at the bottom here that only had one representation of that deck in the top 32, in the top 64. We see one Lapras box, which made top 8 in Seattle. But honestly, in a format filled with Tapu Bulu and Vespiquen, which accounts for, 21 of the 64 decks, so roughly 1/3. I just don't see any way that Lapras can survive. One Gyarados, which I thought was one of the best decks in the format, and I mean, honestly, if people don't play counters to it, it's still really good. It won Birmingham, which is crazy, but I don't think it's really the right time for this deck to succeed in the format anymore. We've got one Greninja, which I do think could be really good still. One Mega Ray Garbodor, which I'd never even heard of before this. I guess you just play Mega Ray with Psychic Energies and Garbodor lines, so that sounds kind of terrifying. But yeah, so we can take a look at the list here and just see everything that made top 64. So one thing I want to say before we analyze the results, there's a couple things that I told you guys about way before Madison and Birmingham happened. And I just want to point this out because I think it's a good point as to why you should follow the channel here. First of all, if it's a good idea, someone else is going to think of it too. So just because I had these ideas a couple weeks before the Madison Regionals doesn't mean that, like, oh, wow, they started here, because other people can think of ideas the same time I do. Who knows where the ideas started, where they originated from. I'm not showing this to try to take credit for the concepts at all. All I'm saying is we had the same concepts that succeeded this past weekend showcased on our channel long before the tournament happened. So we had Metagross being set up with Alolan Vulpix 1 week before Madison. We had that listed on the channel. That was in our top 25 decks in Standard. And it was one of the focused deck lists after the top 25 list. Now, I was running it with text for Gyarados and Rayquaza and Greninja, stuff that really wasn't popular. So there was a lot of stuff to change in this list to get it focused down, but nonetheless, we were setting up Metagross with Alolan Vulpix. And then, of course, I had Vikavolt way before Tapu Bulu even was released, which is why we just had a placeholder Trevenant. Of course, we were setting it up with Alolan Vulpix as well. But if you were caught off guard by the success of Metagross, the success of Vikavolt, or even the use of Alolan Vulpix, stay tuned to this channel because we're always going to be coming up with unique and interesting ideas. Also, in my top 25 video, I also said on the list of decks that were in development, I said that Vespiquen could easily propel itself into the top tier, and then of course it did a week later when it won the Madison Regional. So I feel like we've got really good content here and stuff that can be very insightful to y'all. Now I'm talking about how Passimian can be good, and how Golduck Break is the right way to play Ninetales. So, hey, try it. You never know. So let's get into a little bit of analysis of the top cut breakdown. So 50% of the decks that were in the top 32 from Madison and Birmingham had some sort of main attacker with a fighting weakness. Of course, we're looking at 64 total decks, so 32 of them had fighting weakness either in the form of Drampa, Zoroark, Darkrai, or Umbreon. So if you can fit some sort of fighting Pokemon in your deck, I think it would definitely benefit you. Passimian is really, really, really easy to fit in Garbodor decks, especially if you're running like Garbodor Drampa or Garbodor Trevenant. I really like it in my Garbodor Trevenant list. You might even run it in Vespiquen, although I don't think Vespiquen really has an issue with any of these decks. If you find yourself having an issue with dark decks, definitely consider Passimian if you already run double colorless energies. It's super easy. 2 Passimian, a Kukui, and a band one-shots a Drampa. 3 Passimian with a band one-shots a Drampa, and 4 Passimian with no band one-shots a Drampa. So you got a lot of really cool stuff going on there with Passimian. I don't think Lycanroc or Zygarde are the answer, simply because Tapu Bulu and Vespiquen are so popular right now. Also, anything that can consistently do 180 damage is going to be really, really successful versus Drampa, Darkrai, or Umbreon, because you can just attach a band and do 210 to one-shot the Umbreon. So stuff like Volcanion should be able to handle those decks. And then, of course, you would have to play Volcanion a little bit slower if you wanted to defeat the Drampa version, or you could just say, I don't care about Drampa, Garbodor, because it's not as good as everyone thinks it is, and play the no worries version of Volcanion, where you just still go straight aggro with your max elixirs, whatever. So 31% of the decks had a fire weakness, which is another reason why we mentioned Volcanion. Volcanion becomes increasingly good when we see that 20 of the top 64 overall decks had a fire weakness at some point in their list. So we had 7 Vespiquen decks, 6 Laurentiis, and I say at some point in their decks because the 6 Laurentiis builds, a lot of those focused on Tapu Bulu, which has no weakness, but it's still one shot by Volcanion if they steam up twice. Also 4 Decidueye, but of course in a lot of those the main attacker was Ninetales, and then 3 Metagross. So fire weak decks are interesting because, I mean, do you really need to run a Flareon to one-shot a Vespiquen with whatever deck you're playing? Probably not. Is Flareon going to help against Laurentiis Tapu Bulu? Really, only if you have your Lysanders and you're going to hit the Laurentiis GX on the bench. Does it help versus Decidueye? Same thing. If they're playing the Ninetales version and you're gonna Lysander up the Decidueye, and you still have to hit for 120 damage, so to be able to knock out the Decidueye with weakness. So kind of interesting there. Not so sure how helpful Flareon is against those. And then only 3 of the top 64 decks, so roughly just under 5%, were Metagross. And of course it finished second in Madison. So if you're going to run Flareon, it's pretty much just for Metagross, unless you think Laurentiis GX with Laurentiis promo is going to be popular in your meta. But right now I'm leaning towards running something to help handle the fighting weak Pokemon rather than the fire weak Pokemon, even though it would be super tempting to run stuff that is helpful against the fire weak Pokemon. And of course, if you think there's going to be Metagross in your local tournaments that you're going to, or if you're going to a large tournament, I don't see any problem with running a Flareon line. Nothing wrong with that. So 26.5% of decks were Garbodor based. We had 17 of the top 64. 15 were Garbodor Drampa. 1 was Garbodor Espeon, and 1 was Garbodor Mega Ray, which I still think is a pretty interesting concept that needs to be looked into further. 21.8% of decks, 14 decks, focused their main attacker on something that did not have a weakness. That is a big deal. Being able to not have a weakness with Tapu Bulu and Tapu Koko sure is kind of scary. You're going to have to opt for Ability Lock if you're facing off against Tapu Bulu or Tapu Koko if you want to be able to take them down rather than focusing on weakness. So continuing our breakdown of the top cut, we had 46.8% of decks could attack with a non-EX or GX attacker. 30 of the top 64 decks ran some sort of Pokemon that could attack and only give up 1 prize. So whatever you decide to play, you need to be able to even that prize trade back out, either with heavy Lysander counts to bring up EX or GX Pokemon off the bench, or with your own 1 prize attacker. 40% of decks were ability-based. We had 26 of the top 64. We had 11 that focused on energy acceleration. 8 were Vikavolt, 3 were Metagross variants. 10 were damage-boosting abilities, 6 from the Laurentiis promo, 4 from Volcanion, and 5 were damage counter drops, 4 being Decidueye and 1 being Greninja. So we can see, just looking at these two things, we've got a big advantage in the meta if you can get up on that fighting weakness, if you can block abilities. That's really going to help you, honestly, versus what we see here against 71% of decks. So I definitely think that's kind of the way to go. And then especially if you can do so with a non-EX or GX attacker in the deck, I really, really, really like that approach right now. So what does it all mean? Run either one prize, one energy attackers, like Garbodor, Trevenant, Vespiquen, Zoroark, Greninja, or Gyarados. I still put Greninja and Gyarados on there because literally anything can happen in the meta right now. Or run some form of energy acceleration on hard to knock out Pokemon, like Tapu Bulu being energy or being accelerated to by Vikavolt. No weakness. You can even run Fighting Fury Belt if you want, since you're pretty much going to discard your 3 energies all the time to hit for 180 damage. It can make Tapu Bulu even harder to knock out. Yeah, I know Field Blower exists, but most people only run 1 or 2 copies in their lists. You could run Metagross, of course, still. Metagross is obviously really tough to knock out. You could run Ninetales. I really do think Ninetales is best with Golduck Break right now. That way you can Aqua Patch to the bench and Golduck Break right up to the active. Check out my Ninetales Golduck Break video that I uploaded a couple of days ago for more on that. Or Mega Ray. It's very difficult to knock out Mega Ray with 220 HP. It's more difficult to knock out Mega Ray, obviously, than something like Ninetales or Laurentiis Gx, which only have 210 HP. 210 is a lot easier because 180 with a band on something like Tapu Bulu gets the knockout, whereas you're going to need a band and a Kukui to knock out Mega Ray with your Tapu Bulu. But of course, I'm using that just as an example, and the Tapu Bulu deck actually runs Tapu Koko. That would be my biggest concern with playing a Mega Ray right now, is running into Vikavolt. I just wouldn't be comfortable with Mega Ray at the moment. However, it's obviously really good. It won a huge tournament in Australia, so energy acceleration on hard to knock out Pokemon is really the only way I would go if I was running a actual EX or GX attacker. So number 2 thing that we should focus on is shutting down abilities with Garbotoxin Garbodor or Hex Maniac. I really like running definitely 1 Hex Maniac, maybe even 2, maybe even a 2/2 Garbotoxin if you're not even playing the Trashlands Garbodor. I mean, honestly, shutting down abilities is a big deal right now. If you can hinder Metagross, Vikavolt, Laurentiis promo, Volcanion, Decidueye, stuff like that, I mean, it's a big deal to be able to shut them down. So really, 1 Hex, 4 VS Seeker, 2 Tapu Lele, or even 2 Hex, I think should be standard. 1 or 2 Hex with the rest of the lines being the way I just described them should be standard in the way that you're constructing your decks right now. And number 3, pick your techs wisely. I have the same advice that I had in my video concerning how to pick the right deck right now. Build your deck without any techs. Test against the things that you think you need to tech against, like can you beat Vespiquen without a Karen or an Oricorio? Can you beat Tapu Bulu without an extra Hex Maniac? Can you beat Metagross without a Flareon? Can you beat Volcanion without a Vaporeon? I mean, just try it first, see what you can beat without the techs, and then if you have to tech in 1 or 2 cards here and there, do so very wisely based on what you expect to see and what you just cannot beat. So let's take a look at the tiers at the moment. We're going to start in Tier 3. We're going to rank the top 15 decks this time. We're not going to be as ambitious as last time when we ranked the top 25. I definitely think there are things not listed here that could succeed. Really quickly, I am not going to list Sylveon. I am not going to list Lapras. I'm not going to list Gardevoir. So number 15, we've got Gyarados. Gyarados won the Birmingham Regionals. It's still good if it can be built consistently and not face off against things that can KO all the Magikarp. My issue with it right now, everyone's going to be running Oricorio to counter Vespiquen, and Oricorio also counters Gyarados pretty well. Number 14, we've got Decidueye. Not too much to explain here. It's just hard to set up Decidueye and Vileplume and now Ninetales like 3 out of the 4 decks that were Decidueye that top cut between the two regionals ran Ninetales as well. So it just seems like it's kind of difficult to set it all up. Number 13, we've got Greninja Break. Same issue, kind of hard to set up. Really, really good deck. If you can get it consistent, I think this deck could be even higher on the list. I really like it. A couple of issues with the deck right now, though. A lot of people running Garbotoxin Garbodor or Hex Maniac, things like that really shut down Giant Water Shuriken. Also, Vespiquen and Tapu Bulu are super popular, so it's pretty easy for those decks to get really quick prizes on Greninja Break. Against Tapu Bulu, Greninja is just going to have to start Shadow Stitching as soon as possible and just hope that manually attaching to the bench or Tapu Bulu will eventually not work somehow. Like they have to knock it out before they can attach, which can be really hard, honestly, for Greninja Break. I think some things have to change for Greninja Break to be back as high as I previously had it ranked. Number 12, we've got Mega Rayquaza. Like I said, energy acceleration on something that's hard to knock out is a big deal. Definitely like the concept paired with Garbodor and just running a few Psychic Energies, maybe like 4. I do think that with Tapu Koko running around in all of the Vikavolt lists, I think Mega Rayquaza can be kind of difficult to be successful with right now. Also, I don't think it's going to have a super great Vespiquen matchup, and I don't think it's going to have a super great Garbodor Trevenant or Garbodor Drampa matchup, so I'm not super huge on Mega Rayquaza. Also, Zoroark is running around like crazy right now, and that also has a pretty good matchup against Mega Rayquaza if the Mega Rayquaza player is having to fill their bench to get a knockout on whatever you have active. So on to Tier 2. In 11th place, we have Umbreon Zoroark. Umbreon Zoroark did top cut, I believe, in Birmingham. Definitely a good concept. I like the fact that it uses just one non-EX or GX attacker. What I don't like, though, is that Umbreon requires 2 manual attachments to be able to attack, but it has a good weakness right now, and 200 HP is pretty tough for things to knock out, especially since it resists Garbodor. So definitely a good concept. I do think the correct Dark deck to play is Darkrai EX. Whether you're using Evoltal and Max Elixirs to get energy all over the field, or if you're using the Dragonaire's Dragon Wish to get energy on the field, is definitely a strong play and has a positive matchup versus Garbodor. My only issue with it right now, though, is it has a tough matchup with Volcanion, with Ninetales, Quick Drampa, or even Metagross and Tapu Bulu. It really is a Garbodor counter. I'm not 100% sold on whether it's going to be successful versus the rest of those decks. Now, number 9 on the list, we've got Alolan Ninetales, and this deck's success really all depends on how popular Metagross is. If Metagross is only 5% of the decks, like we saw if you combine Madison and Birmingham's top 32s, then yeah, Alolan Vulpix or Alolan Ninetales is great. It's got a good matchup versus Volcanion, Darkrai, Garbodor, even Tapu Bulu based stuff. It's a pretty good deck, so I do think the right way to play it, like I mentioned before, is to run Golduck Break. I definitely think this deck could get higher on the list than it is right now, but that all depends on how popular Metagross is. Number 8, we've got Laurentiis Tapu Bulu. This deck is good, it's super strong, but honestly, if Volcanion and Flareon are going to be running around, it's just so easy to pick off Laurentiis. A lot of decks are running even 3 Lysander right now, which sounds super crazy, but 2 Lysander, 2 Tapu Lele, and 4 VS Seeker is super standard, so it should be able to get some easy KOs on Laurentiis GX if you're running Flareon or if you're running Volcanion. So I'm not super sold, like I said, on this deck. Also, if Tapu Bulu is knocked out, unlike Vikavolt, you can't next turn just accelerate to Tapu Bulu and attack with Tapu Bulu in the same turn. You're gonna have to use Flower Supply and then attack with Tapu Bulu. So it'll be 2 turns until you're attacking with Bulu again. And although the deck is good, I'm just not a huge fan of that. Taking a couple of turns to reload your Bulu. Number 7, we've got Volcanion. Volcanion is super powerful. You can either run the Turtonator Brooklet Hill version and have a little bit better Garbodor matchup, or you can say, I don't care about Garbodor, I'm going to use Baby Volcanion and Max Elixir and just go all out. And then if I do face a Garbodor, I'll just play a little bit slower by focusing on Baby Volcanion, loading up my benched Volcanions. So it's a really, really, really strong deck. It has a powerful matchup versus a couple of emerging decks like Darkrai, like Umbreon, things like that. And even if you're looking at the top tier decks, it has a good matchup versus Drampa based stuff. It has a good matchup versus Metagross. It can knock out a Tapu Bulu in one shot. So Volcanion does a lot of things that are really, really strong. I definitely think it's a contender, and it could easily bump itself into tier 1. So the first half of tier 1. In at number 6, we have everybody's favorite deck, Garbodor Drampa, quote unquote. Really, I think the best way to run Garbodor Drampa is still run the Magma base or whatever, and you can run the Rainbow Energies if you want, but I really run like 1 or 2 Drampa and then maybe a 3-2-1 Espeon with a Flareon. I really think if Garbodor Drampa is going to survive and actually win another tournament, you're going to have to turn Garbodor and Espeon into a fire type, and you're going to have to run Espeon to help you out versus a couple of matchups like against the mirror match against the opposing Drampas. Espeon is pretty big in that. So I do think Garbodor Drampa is good. It's definitely a tier 1 deck, but I definitely think you need to run something else with it, be it Espeon or Flareon or both, and that's why I have it number 6 right now. Number 5, I have a deck that we saw that was built specifically to counter Garbodor Drampa, and it's Zoroark Drampa Tapu Koko, and it also runs Magma Base. The concept is to combine Magma Base and Tapu Koko to spread an easy 40 to 60 damage to everything on your opponent's side of the field. Then Drampa Berserks and knocks everything out, or Zoroark Mind Jacks and knocks everything out. So it's a really strong concept. Focuses 2 out of the 3 main attackers on 1 prize attackers that only use 1 energy card to attack with. Really strong concept. I definitely like it. I only have an issue with it versus Vespiquen and versus maybe Metagross as well, since Metagross can one-shot everything in the deck. So I definitely think it's a strong deck, and it could even actually beat the Metagross if everything plays out properly. It can even take out Vespiquen with Tapu Koko spreading Flying Flip really early. So consider a couple of things. If Tapu Koko gets extremely popular, you might want to consider a Mr. Mime to block the damage done to your bench, or you might want to consider the Plasmagic Rotom, which I mentioned in my top 10 forgotten standard cards video. Number 4, we've got Metagross Gx. Metagross is super good. Only issues with Metagross are Volcanion and if Flareon catches on, and Flareon's kind of a staple in Vespiquen, which I haven't mentioned yet, so it means I think Vespiquen is rated even higher than this. So that's the only reason why I've got it at number 4. Once Flareon rotates out, I definitely think Metagross is going to be a top tier deck, especially with people hyping stuff like Alolan Ninetales after rotation, or the new Gardevoir that's coming out in Burning Shadows. I definitely think Metagross is going to be a top 3, easily top 3 deck post-rotation. For right now, it's at number 4, and it's super strong, and I definitely think it's worthy consideration for any tournament that you play in. Now for the final top 3 decks of Tier 1, number 3 we've got Garbodor Trevenant. I feel like I'm the only person on this deck. It's so strong, it's so good, there's so much synergy with Trevenant and Garbodor, even if it doesn't look like it at first. Forcing your opponents to make a tough decision. Do they want to be punished for having their trainers and items in their hand, or do they want to play it out and let Garbodor hit them? Is really not a fun spot to be in. Then this deck runs so many N and Tapu Lele and VS Seeker that basically early game, all you're trying to do is just Poltergeist with a band after playing N and hope that 4 or 5 of the cards in their hands are trainer cards and you get the knockout with Poltergeist. And the crazy thing is, because we've gone so supporter heavy and moved away from items a little bit, that most of the time Trevenant does get the knockout. In my top 4 game, when I won a League Cup undefeated with Garbodor Trevenant took 2 KOs on fresh, no damage, 180 HP remaining Darkrai. So Trevenant is a really good card. So is Garbodor. This deck has a lot of space. If you want to run a 2-1 Flareon, you can. If you want to run 4 Passimian, you can. And that's how I have it right now, because I definitely think Passimian is super strong and super overlooked right now. Garbodor Trevenant, very strong. Number 2, I've got Vikavolt, Tapu Bulu, and of course the deck runs Tapu Koko. Anytime you have 180 HP with no weakness that can dish out 180 HP and heal itself and accelerate energies, you've got yourself a pretty strong deck. So I do think this deck should consider running a couple of Fighting Fury Belts or the Aether Paradise Conservation area, just to give Tapu Bulu and Tapu Koko even more HP and make it even harder for them to be knocked out. But I do understand that stuff with 210 HP is a big deal, so being able to attach a choice band and hit for 210 HP with Nature's Judgment when you discard your energies is extremely important. So I do think there needs to be a little bit of both in the list. And then number 1, I have Vespiquen, Zoroark, Flareon. This deck basically does everything that I said a good deck should do. It attacks with 1 prize, 1 energy attackers. It can run Hex Maniac to shut down the abilities. It really does everything. It wins fast. You can help control the game based on what's in your discard pile or what's on your opponent's bench. And if for some reason Metagross fades away, you can even fit Passimian in here if you want to. Have to make sure you run 1 to 2 special charge, of course. But if you're having an issue with dark decks, you can easily counter them with a Passimian. If you don't have an issue with dark decks, there's still other room for other stuff. You can run a Vaporeon in here to turn your Zoroark and Vespiquen into water types and give you an advantageous Volcanion matchup. So this deck is super strong. I don't really see much hurting it. Obviously, Oricorio is the best way to counter it. I think it's even a little bit better than Karen. My opinion has changed on that a little bit after testing it. I still think Karen's strong, but it's just kind of pointless in a lot of other matchups. Oricorio can help you in other matchups and be very strong versus Vespiquen. So I really like this deck. I definitely think it's the number 1 deck. If you are playtesting for a tournament, you really need to practice against Vespiquen, Zoroark, Flareon, Vikavolt, Tapu Bulu, Metagross, Garbodor Drampa, and Zoroark Drampa Tapu Koko. If you want to practice against Volcanion and Darkrai EX, I think that would be wise as well. But I definitely think you need to hit up the first 5 decks that I mentioned on that list. So I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you stay tuned. We're always going to try to have good, fresh, new content. So thank you very much for watching, and as always, I hope you remember when you're playing Pokemon to have fun. Thanks, guys.